You see a lot of things in this job. A lot of things you try to forget. You build walls inside your head to keep the worst of it out. Otherwise, you'd never sleep. But some things don't stay behind the walls. They follow you home. They climb in the truck with you. They wait for you in the quiet of the firehouse when the bells aren't ringing. The call to Sycamore Street. That was one of those. It came in around 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. Structure fire, family of 4 reported inside. We were second on the scene, and the house was already a goner. Flames were roaring out of the second-story windows, licking up into the night sky like something alive and hungry. We did what we could, but it was a recovery mission from the start. You get a feeling for these things. A grim, heavy certainty that settles in your gut. By the time the sun came up, the fire was out. The house was a black, skeletal wreck, dripping water and stinking of wet ash and something else, something sickeningly sweet. We found the family. The parents were in their bedroom, the son in his. All smoke inhalation. But the daughter, a little girl named Sarah, she was the one that got to us. She was in her room, huddled in the closet, clutching a teddy bear. It's always the kids that break through those walls I was telling you about. We were in the overhaul phase, pulling down ceilings, dousing hotspots, making sure it wouldn't reignite. That's when Danny, our probie, found it. Danny was a good kid, but green. Still thought the job was all about heroism and kicking down doors. He hadn't learned about the quiet, ugly parts yet. He was picking through the girl's room, and he called me over. "Hey, Mike," he said, his voice hushed. "Look at this." There, on a part of the floor that was barely scorched, was a doll. A little porcelain thing with a lace dress, black button eyes, and a tiny, painted-on smile. In a room coated with black soot and debris, this doll was pristine, not a mark on it. It was just wrong. I told him to leave it, that it was part of the scene. But I got called away to help with a stubborn wall section, and when I looked back, I saw him slip it into the big cargo pocket of his turnout pants. I should have said something more. I should have made him put it back. That's the thought that keeps me up at night. Back at the station, the mood was sour. We call it a firehouse hangover. The exhaustion, the adrenaline crash, the images you can't unsee. Danny was quiet, sitting by his locker. I saw him take the doll out, wiping a non-existent smudge from its cheek before tucking it away inside. The first weird thing happened that night. I was on watch, sitting at the front desk, and the dispatch speaker crackled to life. It was just static at first. Then a tiny little girl voice whispered, "Is he here?" It was so faint, I thought I'd imagined it. I checked the logs. Nothing. No calls, no radio tests. I chalked it up to being tired and haunted. But it got worse. The bay doors would randomly slide open in the middle of the night, flooding the engine room with cold air. Tools would be moved. The captain's coffee mug flew off a shelf and shattered against the wall. We all started having nightmares. Not just the usual fire dreams, but specific ones. We were all back at the Sycamore Street house, and the little girl, Sarah, would be standing in the smoke, pointing at us. No, not at us. At Danny. Danny was falling apart. He got jumpy, pale. Dark circles formed under his eyes. He told me once, his voice shaking, that he kept seeing her. A little girl made of smoke, standing in the corners of the bunk room, just watching him. He'd hear her humming a nursery rhyme when no one else was around. He had the doll in his locker, and he started talking to it, begging it to leave him alone. We all thought he was cracking under the pressure. The breaking point came during a routine training drill. We were practicing ladder rescues, and Danny was climbing. He was halfway up when the ladder just buckled. The hydraulics gave out with a scream of tortured metal. He fell 30 feet, and it was a miracle. He only broke his leg and a few ribs. When we inspected the ladder, There was nothing wrong with it. The mechanics chief said it was impossible, that the system had 3 fail-safes. It was that night we all sat Danny down in the common room. He was pale and sweating, his leg in a cast. He confessed everything. About taking the doll, about the whispers, about seeing her. We'd had enough. We weren't going to be terrorized in our own firehouse. The captain, a pragmatic old salt named O'Malley, grabbed a crowbar and jimmied open Danny's locker. There it was, sitting on a shelf next to his street clothes, its button eyes seeming to follow us. O'Malley snatched it. "We're finishing this," he growled. We took it out back to the burn pit we use for training. O'Malley doused it in lighter fluid and tossed a match on it. The fluid flared up in a whoosh of orange flame. But the doll didn't burn. The fire just wrapped around it, like it was water flowing around a rock. The lace on its dress didn't even singe. It just sat there in the inferno, its painted smile seeming to widen. And then we all heard it. Laughter, a little girl's laughter, echoing all around us. The lights in the firehouse flickered and went out. The bay doors slammed shut with a deafening boom. We were trapped. We ran back inside, and it was chaos. A whirlwind of smoke and cold air tore through the station. Lockers flew open, chairs were thrown, and in the swirling dark, we could all see her. The smoky shape of a little girl, her form solidifying, her eyes glowing like hot coals. This wasn't the ghost of a victim. This was something hateful. Just then, my phone rang. The sound was so out of place, it made us all jump. It was a detective I knew, a guy named Alvarez. He was lead on the Sycamore Street case. His voice was grim. "Mike," he said, "we just found something at the scene. The father kept a journal. It wasn't an accident." He set the fire. I was about to say I was a little busy, but then he said the words that froze my soul. He wasn't trying to kill his family, Mike. He was trying to kill the doll. In his journal, he wrote that it made him do it. It made him hurt his wife and son. He said its name wasn't Sarah. He called it the souvenir. He was trying to burn it when he succumbed to the smoke. My phone clattered to the floor. We didn't bring back a ghost. We brought back the thing that caused it all. We brought the murderer back with us. The entity in the room let out a shriek of rage, and the windows of the firehouse began to crack one by one. In this line of work, trust is everything. When you're running into a burning building, you have to know, without a shadow of a doubt, that the guy behind you has your back. That the captain calling the shots is making the best possible decision to keep you alive. You trust them with your life, every single shift. The moment that trust is gone, well, that's a special kind of hell. For me, that hell started with the old textile mill fire. I'm Frank, and I've been with the department for 15 years. I'm what they call an old head. I've seen enough fire to know its moods, its personality. I can tell by the color of the smoke what's burning. I can hear the way a building groans when it's about to give up. And for the last few months, something had felt wrong. We were getting hit with a string of arsons, all in abandoned buildings, all in the middle of the night. The fires were different. They were smarter, meaner. The textile mill was the third one. It went up like a Roman candle. We went in, and it was a maze of machinery and flames. Captain Miller was on the radio, calm as ever, directing teams. Miller was a legend, cool under pressure, textbook perfect on his calls. The kind of guy you'd follow into hell with a bucket of water. That night, he sent my partner and me to search the north wall. 10 minutes later, the whole section of roof came down right where we had been standing. We got out, but just barely. Miller called it a good read on his part, pulling us out just in time. To everyone else, he was a hero. To me, it felt lucky, too lucky. I started paying attention. I pulled the incident reports from the other two fires, a warehouse and an old schoolhouse. I found a pattern. In every fire, an accelerant was used that created an incredibly hot, fast burn. In every fire, a key structural element failed way sooner than it should have. And in every fire, Captain Miller made a last-second call that saved a crew from a near-certain disaster he had sent them into moments before. He was always one step ahead. It was like he knew what the fire was going to do before it did it. A chilling thought started to creep into my mind, a thought so ugly I tried to push it away. What if he knew because he was the one starting them? What if our hero captain was a firebug? It didn't make sense. Miller had a family, a perfect record. He was the face of the department, but I couldn't shake it. I started watching him. At the station, he was the same old Miller, making coffee, telling jokes, running drills. But I saw little things. The way his eyes would light up when the bells went off for a big fire. A little smirk he'd try to hide when we'd get back from one of his fires, exhausted and shaken, and he'd clap us on the back and say, "That's what we live for, always." The next one was a cannery down by the docks. This time, there was a fatality. A homeless man had been sleeping inside. We found him. Miller stood over the body, his face a mask of grim duty, and said, "This son of a bitch just crossed a line." But later, back at the station, I saw him alone in the locker room. He was looking at his reflection in the mirror, and for just a second, I saw it. A look of pure, ecstatic pride. He wasn't sad. He was thrilled. He had graduated. I knew I had to do something, but I had no proof. It was my word against a department hero. Who would believe me? So I waited and I watched. I started carrying a small voice recorder in my pocket. The paranoia was eating me alive. Every call we went on, I was terrified. Not of the fire, but of the man leading us into it. Was this the one? The one he designed for us? The call for the St. Ambrose Abandoned Hospital came at 3 a.m. I knew, the second I heard the address, that this was it. This was his masterpiece. The place was a death trap, a maze of asbestos-lined corridors, rotten floors, and collapsed ceilings. It was the perfect place to make sure no one walked out. As we geared up, Miller pulled me aside. "Frank," he said, his eyes glinting behind his mask. "You and I are taking the lead on this one. We're going straight to the heart of it." My blood ran cold. This was it. He was going to take me out. Maybe he suspected I knew. Inside, it was worse than I imagined. The heat was immense, the smoke so thick you couldn't see your own hands. Miller was on the radio, barking orders, sending the other teams on wild goose chases to the far wings of the hospital. He was isolating us. It was just him and me, pushing deeper and deeper into the building. "We have to check the old surgical wing," he yelled over the roar. Heard this place was a squatter haven. We reached a long corridor, and he pointed to the end. "You check those rooms. I'll hold here." I started moving down the hall, my heart hammering. I knew it was a trap. I glanced back, and I saw him. He wasn't watching me. He was looking at his watch, and he was smiling. A wide, joyful smile. He was counting down. I didn't go into the rooms. I ducked into an old janitor's closet and pulled out my recorder. "Captain," I said, my voice shaking, "why are you doing this?" His voice came back over the radio, suddenly cold and calm. "Because this is living, Frank. This is what it feels like to be a god. To build something so terrible and so beautiful, and then to walk out of it like a hero. It's the greatest feeling in the world. You killed that man at the cannery," I said. "He was a nobody," he spat back. "A sacrifice for the art. And now, so are you. You have about 90 seconds before the entire roof of that corridor comes down." I timed the charges myself. I looked out of the closet. He was gone. He had already started making his way out, ready to tell the story of how his brave firefighter, Frank, had been lost in a tragic collapse while searching for victims. But he made one mistake. He taught me too well. I knew this building. I knew there was a laundry chute in that closet. I squeezed myself in, praying it would hold, and tumbled down 3 stories into a pile of rubble and filth in the basement. I made my way out through a sub-level window, just as the entire central wing of the hospital collapsed in on itself with a deafening roar. I saw Miller standing outside, his back to me, watching the destruction. He was telling the other chiefs that I was still inside. He was playing the part of the devastated captain perfectly. I walked up behind him, covered in soot and grime. "You timed it wrong," I said. The look on his face when he turned and saw me, it wasn't fear, it wasn't shock, it was disappointment. Like I had ruined his favorite painting. He didn't say a word. He just lunged at me. We fought right there, in the flickering orange light of the fire he had created. He was a monster. I had the recording. It was all there. His confession, his motives, his madness. Miller died that night. They say he ran back into the collapsing building to try and save me. He got a hero's funeral. The whole department mourned him. Only I know the truth. I have to see his picture on the wall of heroes every day when I go to work. I have to live with the secret. I survived the fire, but sometimes I think a part of me is still buried in that rubble with him. Some calls stick with you, not because of the fire or the danger, but because of the quiet little details you find in the wreckage. Things that whisper a story that's much older and colder than the embers you're putting out. For my crew and me, that call was to the old Evergreen Meadows nursing home. The place had been shut down for about 6 months, a real snake pit of a facility that the state finally condemned. The call came in late for reports of smoke. When we got there, it was nothing much. A squatter's fire in one of the old patient rooms probably started from a candle. We had it knocked down in 10 minutes. The whole place gave me the creeps, though. It had that smell of disinfectant that can't quite cover up the smell of sickness and despair. We were doing our final sweep, making sure there were no extensions, when my partner, Dave, stopped dead in the hallway. "Sam," he said, "you hear that?" I stopped and listened. Over the crackle of the radio and the drip of water, there was another sound. A faint, rhythmic tapping. Tap, 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 tap. It was soft, but persistent. It sounded like it was coming from inside the wall. The captain came over. We all stood there in the dark, smoky hallway, listening. "It's just pipes," he said, but he didn't sound convinced. The tapping continued. Tap, 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 tap. It felt desperate, like a code. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was on the other side of that drywall. "Cap, we gotta check it out," I said. "What if someone's trapped?" He grumbled, but he gave the nod. We got the Halligan bar and a sledgehammer. I'll never forget the sound of that first hit, how it echoed through the empty building. We tore into the drywall, pulling out chunks of plaster and insulation. And then we saw it. We all went silent. It wasn't a person. It was a skeleton. A small one, curled up in the fetal position in the narrow space between the studs. It had been there for a very, very long time. The cops came. The medical examiner came. It was a whole thing. They determined the remains were of an elderly woman, probably a patient, and she'd been there for at least a decade. We went back to the station, and nobody said much. You don't just find a skeleton in a wall and go back to playing cards. But that wasn't the end of it. That was the beginning. The tapping didn't stop. It followed us. A few nights later, I was in my bunk, and I heard it. Tap, 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 coming from the inside of my locker. I threw the door open. Nothing. It happened to everyone. Dave heard it against the passenger window of the engine on the way to a call. The captain heard it coming from the bottom of his coffee mug. It was always the same rhythm, the same desperate, quiet plea. It was starting to drive us crazy. We were becoming the haunted crew of Station 12. Things escalated. We started seeing her. Just a glimpse of a frail old woman in a faded nightgown, standing at the edge of a scene or reflected in a window as we drove by. She never looked at us with anger. She just looked sad. She was trying to tell us something. I couldn't take it anymore. I went down to the county records office on my day off. I looked up the history of Evergreen Meadows. I found a patient record from 12 years ago. A woman named Agnes Miller. No middle name, no family listed. The last entry in her file just said, patient wandered off premises. Presumed deceased. Nobody had looked for her. Nobody cared. She had just been forgotten. I found one other thing. A list of staff members from that time. And I started making some calls. Most of them didn't remember her, but one nurse did. Oh, Agnes, she said over the phone. Sweet woman. Quiet. She was always getting into it with one of the orderlies, though. A real nasty piece of work named Henderson. She accused him of stealing her things. I found him. Howard Henderson. He was living in a neat little suburban house an hour away. A grandfatherly-looking guy, retired. Dave and I drove out there. We told him we were investigators, reopening the case. He played dumb, of course. Said he barely remembered the woman. He was calm, polite, offering us lemonade. We had nothing on him, and we knew it. We were about to leave, defeated, when it happened. Henderson reached into his pocket for a handkerchief to wipe his brow, and I heard it, clear as day, coming from his chest. Tap, 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 tap. It was his heart. He had a pacemaker, and it was misfiring with the exact rhythm that had been haunting us for weeks. I stared at his chest. That sound, I said. I've heard that sound before. The color drained from Henderson's face. The grandfatherly mask melted away, and for the first time, I saw the monster underneath. He knew. She wouldn't shut up. He hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. The old hag caught me lifting a few bucks from her purse. She was going to tell. I just wanted to scare her. I put her in the wall cavity, told her I'd let her out if she promised to keep quiet. But I got busy, and I forgot. He lunged for a fireplace poker, but the sudden movement was too much. He clutched his chest, his eyes wide with shock, and collapsed to the floor. As we stood over him, waiting for the paramedics we'd called, his frantic, arrhythmic tapping slowed, and then stopped. And in that moment, the entire house went completely, profoundly silent. The echo was gone. We never heard it again. Agnes wasn't a vengeful spirit. She wasn't trying to hurt us. She just wanted someone to listen. She just wanted us to find him. Sometimes, this job isn't about putting out fires. It's about listening to the whispers left behind in the smoke. And that's all for tonight. Remember, the most terrifying monsters are the ones that look just like us. The ones who might even live right next door. If these stories serve as a good reminder to trust your instincts, then show your support and like and subscribe. Hitting that bell means you'll get a warning before the next nightmare begins. Sleep well, if you can.